So I'm going to ask you first, just because I've done a lot of mocks. I'm sure you've done mocks. I'm sure you've even done best ball. And, redraft is a little bit different compared to best ball because the wide receivers get pushed up the board. Even quarterbacks get pushed up the board. So if you've done enough redraft, you can kind of talk to that. But also, I do think that best ball will be somewhat similar to redraft. It's just a really good thing because people are invested in best ball drafts. They want to stay there because they're paying money. So we have the second round this year. And I love the first round. I think the first round is fantastic. I think all the guys that are going in the first round should be going in the first round. So we have the second round. There's a lot of guys that are kind of going higher. Maybe you don't think should be, or like kind of like me. I don't think there's a big difference between some of these guys that are going a little bit later. So who are guys that you're currently targeting in the second round of fantasy football drafts right now? And guys, maybe a guy that you are avoiding in the second round.
Well, it's tough. This second round is tough because I think for those who are in snake drafts, especially, it's like draft position really doesn't matter in the second round because there's a chance you could get your guy at the top of the second round. There's a chance you can get him at the back end of the
Only
second round.
thing I will say this real quick. I do think there's a difference between once Saquon Barkley and like Jonathan Taylor, like those are the two guys.
They're like right at the end of that first round, second round, depending on your draft.
Round. Once those guys are off the board, I do agree. So I do think having like a first pick or maybe a last pick, just because you can double dip on those two guys. But after those guys, I do agree with you. It's a lot of the same. But
yeah, it really comes down to like the back end RBs, right? So the back end RB1s, and then you're talking about your back end wide receiver ones, high end wide receiver twos. And for me, those are a lot of the players that I like, right? We talk about guys like Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, Michael Pittman. Like there's a bunch of those guys in there. And then there's like the next up too. You got Marvin Harrison has entered that fold. You got your Chris Olave, right? A lot of people are expecting him to take a jump up. So for me, I look at the receivers and I know I can find me personally, I love taking veteran receivers. I think there's value in knowing that the targets are there, knowing that the production is there. And I get that there's anticipation, but that's typically where I found value. And then when it comes to the running backs, you have your Kyron Williams, you have your Josh Jacobs, your Derrick Henry. Those guys, there's a lot of question marks outside of the top six backs. There's a lot of question marks. So for you, if you can get Jahmyr Gibbs, like you mentioned, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley early on, I think that's good. But it almost pays to like just take your guy at the draft spot. I wouldn't look at ADP. I'm not really looking at any. I kind of look at what did I take early on? Did I take a running back? Did I take a receiver? Do I need upside? Do I need floor? And that's how I evaluate the second round. Because to me, if I get Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Adams, it's kind of all the same to me. If I get Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, I'm kind of happy with some of those results no matter what. So that's where I'm at in the second round. I feel like it's a hard place to navigate, but you have to really pay attention to what you have at the top of your draft. If you have a lot of upside, maybe you balance it out with floor. Just your style of drafting, I would say.
So let's say Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, like Jahmyr Gibbs, Puka Nacua, AJ Brown are off the board, like those big guys, Garrett Wilson too, right? And then it's usually like Marv, Kyron Williams ish. Like who are you taking if you have like pick 14? Because I think it's just once Jonathan Taylor and once Saquon Barkley off the board, there's like a little bit of a drop. Who are you taking at what was that, 15 then? Like I think
15.
14, right around there.
So
who are you taking there?
14, 15, I'm looking at Devontae Adams. And to me, I think it's a no-brainer. This is a guy who we've always considered a top five receiver. Had a little bit of a down year last year. A lot of people like Devontae Adams is falling off. Well, you get a quarterback upgrade, supposedly with Gardner Minshew to me. So the targets will still be there. He was really effective in making Michael Pittman a wide receiver one last year. And then we have one of the elite receivers in the game at Devontae Adams, to me, falling down in the draft. So he's going to command more targets. He's going to command touchdowns. We know that's with Devontae Adams. We know that comes. And I think you get a little bit more consistency than guys that are going after him. So I think with running back, you can kind of eliminate some of the questionable decisions. And there's a chance if you're at 15, you might get a valuable back there in the next round anyway, because we got guys like Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, similar types that are going in the third, fourth round. So, Rachaad White, like there's a lot of options in that third round when it comes to running back. I'm taking Devontae Adams because I truly think he's the last of the elite receivers that go, and you're getting him at a discount right now.
I think, like, when I look at it, I do think Devontae Adams probably the safest bet in that range. Now, for me personally, I do question the ceiling, but I do think like I don't see him finishing worse than like 15 points per game
What's your
in that
ceiling for
range.
Devontae Adams? Like, what do you think? Because Pittman was solid with the Colts last year, right? And
Yeah.
Devontae already was top 10 last year with Aiden O'Connell.
So the reason why, like, I look at Michael Pittman, and obviously Devontae Adams is a better wide receiver than Michael Pittman, but Michael Pittman also, like, Pittman was good, but I want to say he was also like around wide receiver 15 in terms of points per game. It was like right around like high end 14s, low 15
Yeah,
points per game, which was good. But he was also going in the 7th round. Like it was a lot different for where he was currently going last year to where he's going this year. And like with Devontae Adams, I just feel like I don't know how many touchdowns Gardner Minshew is going to throw for. I don't know how many receiving yards, or passing yards, but I do feel confident that Devontae Adams will be one of the league leaders in targets this season. And I think that there's a very stable floor there with him. I just don't know. Does he get to, 12 plus touchdowns? Does he get to over like 1,500 receiving yards? I feel like the ceiling for him is more of like mid wide receiver range than like an elite level, like 20 fantasy points per game type of player. And that's not wrong. Like that's not bad for the guys that are going in his range, because
right.
it's like, what's Drake London's ceiling? What's Chris Olave's ceiling? And then what's their floor? You know what I'm saying? So like, I think that Devontae Adams in that range is just somebody who's ultra safe. And if you want to take the safe route, which may be the play this year in the 2nd round with looking at the
Man,
guys that are going in there. So that might be the play this year, because I don't mind Devontae Adams in that range either. I think he's a solid target. Um,
you mentioned Drake London, you mentioned Chris Olave. Like Drake London is a player. I don't know how you feel about him. I want to get your opinion on him, but I feel like Drake London, it's almost got to a point now. Like he's a player that I loved in the offseason. I'm like, yo, he's obviously going to kill it with Kirk Cousins, and he has massive
yeah,
potential. But the ADP now is starting to
it's
climb
high.
so high. You got to take him early in the 2nd round. How you feeling
Yeah.
about Drake London this year?
So I love Drake London. I will say the ADP is kind of crazy though. Now, when you look at best, there is a little bit. It's gonna be tough right now to gauge ADP for redraft, just because we're so early, and it's gonna change a lot once August hits. And I think that there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna be very skeptical of Drake London, where like in best ball, he's going in the beginning of the 2nd round, like high, like 204. But I've seen him a lot of times in redraft fall to like the 209, the
Yeah,
back end of the 2nd round. And I much rather take him there because see, the problem that I have is when we look at Drake London, who I think is a fantastic receiver. I think Drake London is a stud. I think he's been severely handicapped with, like, when you look at completion percentage or adjusted completion percentage for that Atlanta duo of quarterbacks. Taylor Heineke was last in the NFL in the adjusted completion percentage. And what was the other guy? Desmond Ritter.
Ritter.
He was bottom 20s. He was actually like right around 30. So he just didn't have any help. And they haven't had a good quarterback there. And as long as is Kirk Cousins-esque, I don't
Yeah.
like, I kind of question him coming off the Achilles a little bit, but as long as he's Kirk Cousins-esque, I have confidence that Kirk can produce high-end talent. The biggest question I have is like, when you're looking at Drake London, you can see at least the situation's getting better, right? Kirk Cousins should come in there and should change the situation, which gives you hope for Drake London. The biggest problem I have is like Drake London goes right around Chris Olave. Like, what is the ceiling for Chris Olave? What changes for Chris Olave? Like Derek Carr is the same quarterback. Maybe he gets more comfortable his 2nd year in New Orleans, but like, what is the ceiling for Chris Olave? Are we like, I feel like it's a ceiling of a high end wide receiver 2, a back end wide receiver 1, where like I can talk myself into it with Drake London. Maybe it could be a mid wide receiver
Yeah.
1. Like we
Yeah.
just don't know with him. So like that's the biggest problem that I have. And I love Drake London's talent. I don't think he's honestly a worse wide receiver. I would say he's right on par with Chris Olave. We just haven't fully seen it with him just because of quarterback situation.
I think Chris Olave is who he is, and that's a mid-tier wide receiver 2. He's not going to lead the league in
Right.
receptions. He's not going to lead the league in touchdowns. So he's a yardage hog, and that's we got to know that's just what he is. And this is probably the last year that I'm assuming that the Saints bring in some kind of receiver upgrade. They have to compliment him at some point. But Drake London's going to be the focal point of this passing attack. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like for me, yeah, maybe he was wide receiver 35, 37, somewhere in that range last year. But we're talking about a guy that has now has a competent quarterback that is going to be focused, hyper focused on getting him the football, just like he did in Minnesota with Justin Jefferson. And I see
Right.
tons of potential with Drake London. It's just we haven't seen it yet. So
Yeah,
you're paying
exactly.
right now for the upside, which I
Right.
guess I don't mind.
It's risky. It's risky.
Right.
You're taking the risk compared to a guy like you said, Devontae Adams. Like I
It's
think is a
Mike
very scary.
Evans. Drake London. If
Right.
Drake London has a Mike Evans year, we're like, yo, this was the greatest
Exactly.
pick of
Yeah.
all time. 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. We're like, fuck. Drake London, he panned out. But it's
Right.
like you have to draft him now at that same range. To me,
Right.
I don't know. I like the upside, but that's where I start to question things.
No, and I agree. And for me, it's like once again, I'm kind of beating on this guy, and I feel bad. And I talk about him a lot on live. It's just Chris Olave. I don't see like when you're looking at points per game, it's 14.5. I mean, DK Metcalf goes in the end of the fourth round,
Yeah.
beginning of the fifth round, and he averaged 14 points per game last year. Like, what is the difference here, and what changed for the situation to have Chris Olave go that high? He's a fantastic player, but once again, it's just I can see the potential with Drake London. So it's like, yeah. So let's talk about
I got crushed last year with Olave. I kind of had the
yeah.
same stance last year, and it's like for all the targets that he gets, right? Like Derek Carr does throw the ball a lot his way, and everybody's like, oh, he's got the targets, he's getting his A dot is crazy. You can go to the analytics, but he is who he is as a receiver. He's not a possession receiver.
And
He's
Derek
not a
Carr is who he is as a quarterback.
right, right.
So it's like it's stayed the same. And he's not the only way that I see Chris Olave truly outperforming where he's currently going is if the touchdowns go his way, which touchdowns are fluky. I mean, maybe he's able to get, three, maybe I think last year he had 5 or 4.
Yeah,
So maybe he's able to get like 8. And then maybe the receiving yards go up to maybe like 1,300 because I think last year was around 1,100. But like that's what you got to talk yourself into and like say that maybe Derek Carr can have a really good season, which he can't. This kind of stuff can happen, but it's just like, how much higher can we truly go when there's other players around him that I just think have the same floor as Chris
yeah.
Olave with a higher ceiling, and the situations have changed.
Give me Zay Flowers 5 rounds
Yeah,
after if I want Chris Olave production.
Last year we were taking it was like Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, and Devontae Smith. And those guys are now being like on sleeper at least. Jalen Waddle's a late 3rd round. Devontae Smith's going in the 4th. So why are we taking Chris? And people will say, well, he's the number 1 target on his team. All right. But like those guys are also, we're talking about Miami. Miami's probably going to, Tua's going to throw more passing touchdowns than Derek Carr. I would say Jalen Waddle's more explosive than Chris Olave. Yeah. So you have that, like he's going to have spike weeks. And then I just think Devontae Smith is one of the best wide receiver 2s in the NFL that sees a big target share sitting there next. It's him and AJ Brown. And he once again, those guys average the same amount of points per game as Chris Olave, but Chris Olave is going in the middle of 2nd round. Those guys are going in the 4th, 3rd round. So it just doesn't make sense to me with Chris Olave for where he's going. And I talked about this earlier. I don't see a difference between Chris Olave and just going DK Metcalf in the 5th round and just take a different shot on a guy that's going in. Like, I love Devon Achane because I'll take the chance on a massive potential with him. And if it's wrong,
Devon Achane in the 2nd round?
Yeah, because like who has a bigger upside in your opinion? Him or Chris Olave?
Well, Achane on a weekly basis, it's going to be Achane, right?
He has a chance to win you your week. I just don't look at Chris Olave and say he can win me my week that week.
You talked about DK Metcalf afterward.
Yeah, and I could just guys like
Keenan Allen,
in the 5th.
Cooper Kupp. There's a whole lot of receivers that can actually win you your week available much later than Chris Olave. Right. I just don't see the upside there. And if you don't have upside, like maybe you have a nice solid 5-catch, 80-yard weekly floor, that's fine. But that doesn't win fantasy leagues.
No.